Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Bulletproof Selling. My name is Sean Rhodes, the Chief Sales Sergeant here at Bulletproof Selling and author of the book Bulletproof Selling, a guide for systemizing sales on the battlefield of business. Now, here at Bulletproof Selling, our mission, our mantra is that hope is not a sales strategy. And so we are here multiple times a week to make sure that whatever role you hold in the great wide world of sales, that you are systematically removing hope from how you sell. As my work as a Marine Corps war correspondent, we quickly discovered that hope did not work on the battlefield. And I'm here to tell you, it does not work on the battlefield of business either. So wherever you are in sales, at the top of the chain as a VP of sales or as the CEO of a company, or maybe you're down there on the front lines dialing for dollars every single day, you're going to get something out of this show that is going to help you remove hope from how you sell. And over the course of the last few years, when we've been running this, every single show we bring on a guest that helps us teach others how to remove hope. These have been best-selling authors, Hall of Fame speakers, people that are out there on the front lines leading sales teams, and those that are helping those salespeople achieve their dreams, those goals, those results as well. So, across all of the people that we've had, of course, my favorite are the ones that have that frontline experience, the ones that are out there every day in the world leading sales teams, helping sales teams achieve their goals. And one area that challenges salespeople time and time again are these complex sales, the kind where you've got a large organization you're pursuing. Maybe you're starting at the bottom. You only have the name of the company, but you've then got to work in to develop who is the decision maker there. What are their challenges? What are their needs? What are their concerns? How do I build a target package on this person or these people if there's multiple decision makers so that I can prove to them I'm the person that's going to provide more value along the way and long after I make the sale, long after the transaction. So it's not a one and done type of thing. And so when this person reached out to me, today's guest, it was an easy decision because of the background that this person has in helping teams scale and helping them structure strategy to go after these large accounts and to just make sure that they're doing it in a more efficient, more systemized way. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome on today's show our guest, Mr. Ryan Staley. Ryan, welcome to Bulletproof Selling.
What's up, Sean? Happy to be on the show, man. Looking forward to this.
Thank you, sir. So obviously, I've gotten to read your bio, but probably our listeners have not. Podcast, live stream, all the cool folks that are tuning in. Tell us a little bit about your journey because you're not just somebody that hung out your shingle as a sales trainer. You had to earn your stripes the hard way. So tell us about your journey through the sales field and how you ended up where you are today.
Yeah, so I've it's funny because I work with a lot of SaaS CEOs or tech CEOs all the time on this, and one of the things is that I always kind of disclose is like, hey, listen, like I've had every single job from like the bottom, like I don't want to say like the dishwasher, right, all the way to being an executive. So it's been an amazing experience. I mean, like my first job out of school was basically at like almost like a boiler room where it was like a 24-hour hard close. It was like the SDR world before SDRs existed, and you had to slam and crush 250 dials a day. And so
Like
that was
here's the phone book, start with A. Yeah.
I was just like, go make it happen, right? Like, and so I always worked for companies like that had either limited resources or no infrastructure, that they were just kind of like, go make it happen, right? And so always had to find a way. I did that as, kind of started off in the mid-market, then moved up into the enterprise, and then managed a team, brought them back because they were struggling really just from lack of leadership, and they were a remote office, and then got tossed into an enterprise group. And they're like, hey, Ryan, we want you to start an enterprise group. And so I did that and grew that from 0 to 30 million in ARR in about 5.5 years with only 4 salespeople. And the key vehicle that we used for that was leveraging really big deals and continuously like basically applying the 80-20 principle to everything that we did. So we escalated the deal sizes, the results for the team, and then, the basically revenue for the company. And so did that. And so now fast forward a little bit, this is 3 years later, I started my own company 3 years ago, where I help companies implement the principles that I use to leverage that, and, a quick sprint kind of method in a 2 or 3 month package. So, yeah.
Now, that is a great background. You mentioned something that is so valuable that they even taught it to us in the military, which was the idea of working smarter, not harder. So if we could send a single person to achieve a mission, we would, rather than, how do we engage 1,000 individuals for the same effect? So I love the idea of applying this into the field of sales, the idea of being a force multiplier. How do I work more efficiently, use the 80-20 rule to make sure that I'm not just making 100 dials, but I'm making 20 dials to the right people. So I'm curious, in your experience working with sales teams, coaching sales teams, where do you find salespeople relying on hope more than they should in the area of how they leverage themselves, their time, their activity? We each only have 24 hours in a day, but yet I consistently see the best salespeople leveraging their time better. So where are they relying on hope that you see is just not creating the results that they're after?
Yeah, I would say, the one thing that stuck out to me where hope's leveraged a lot is I think, and this isn't just reps, this is companies, this is teams. And I've talked to a lot of really high level executives about this, and they do a really good job of their internal processes and qualifying the prospect. But what they're not really doing effectively that I see is like a common trend or a single biggest mistake that leads people to try and leverage hope, is they're not really looking at orchestrating the emotional experience that the buyer is going through, especially with larger deals, not just vertically, but horizontally, and then looking at how they all interact, the politics involved, how those people are motivated and compensated, and then basically orchestrating that. So, because if you do that, the beautiful thing about it is, like, you get the answers to the tests a lot of times, right? They will tell you like what the competitor is proposing. They will tell you, like, you'll get indicators like, hey, instead of working another 9 months on this deal, that's a multi-million-dollar deal, there's like massive flags because the CEO's son is their vendor that they're leveraging for this solution. So, hey, maybe we don't go down that route. And this is a true story that actually happened. So anyways, those are just a couple examples of what I would say is like where people leverage hope. And so they do a great job on the process. They do a great job mechanically and logically, but they forget that emotional component. And that's what gets you asymmetrical results, especially if we're talking the 80-20 rule or Pareto's principle, that I think could have a massive impact.
And so I want you to sell me on this, because I know a lot of our listeners right now are hearing you and they're like, "Oh, I understand if I am engaging them more emotionally and I'm hitting the right emotional buttons, they're probably going to buy from me." But my sales cycle is long enough already. I'm not listening to this show to engage another 18 weeks in my sales cycle to learn about emotional triggers, with each individual prospect. So Ryan, I'd love to hear how understanding the ways that I can orchestrate the emotional journey that my buyers go through and really match up well, how is that going to shorten my sales cycle?
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's funny you mentioned that, because I think there were stats on this, and we looked at over 380 different B2B sales organizations, right? And that was one of the 4 biggest challenges, with that sales cycles increased by 33% in 22 versus 21, right? So this actually shortens the sales process. And there's a real easy formula, and I'll share it. So you might want to write this down because it's simple to actuate. As long as you just ask the right questions and you have it on your radar, right? Especially, and I'm looking at this through the lens of larger deals, right? If you're doing a short transactional deal that's, a week, less than $5,000 annually, then that's a different sales process, right? So this is more for $20,000, $30,000 plus, where there's multiple stakeholders and it's not just black and white, let's go, right? It's not an impulse buy. And so what I would say is there's a couple of things. Is one is really about what their KPIs are, and being, from a military background, I'm sure those will hit to you, is like, those are the key performance indicators of how a person's evaluated for their job. And especially with bigger companies, there's usually 2 or 3 really, really big ones that they're laser focused on. Okay. So that's one, is, what are their KPIs, how they're evaluated. The other ones too is how are they compensated, right? So you could ask that easily. And this actually helped me get a deal that started off as like a $30,000 a month deal, ended up being $200,000 a month. And the key reason why is because I know how the director of sourcing was compensated. Once I started to connect with him, understood like, hey, how are you evaluated? He's like, yeah, I need to hit this, this, and this. And I'm like, oh, well, does that lead into your bonus, right? That cost savings number that you have, does that lead in? Yes, it does. And what's the bonus time frame? And he's like, well, we get trued up in, they weren't on a fiscal year, they weren't on a calendar year, they're on a fiscal year. So he had a timeline that he had to hit that. So I designed the solution with an upfront incentive that helped him hit his bonus, which motivated him to move the deal much faster, right? So that's the second piece. And then the last but not least is where the trust factor comes in. And so Everything that I've seen from executives, especially at larger companies, they are highly, highly motivated. Otherwise, they do not get there, right? It doesn't happen on accident. And the reason why they're highly motivated is because of what's important to them outside of work, not what's important to them at work, right? Because that drives it a lot. It could be family, it could be status, it could be a lot of different things, right? So it's really understanding, like, what's the number one thing that they'll spend the most time on outside of work, and outside of family, right? If they say family, and what are they most passionate about? And like, I had an executive of a Fortune 500 company. I asked that question, and basically he went on like a 45-minute rant about he loved to photograph waterfalls, right? Which is something I would never have guessed. Had his own private Instagram page and everything. And so, that was something that I learned within maybe a half-hour meeting him, whereas most people would go through an entire sales cycle of 9 months and never know that. And what it does is it facilitates the acceleration of the deal because of trust, and because you know exactly what's motivating them to do everything they can, and then you just align with that.
And so this is such a valuable process then, because this is something that I'm sure you'll agree with me here, Ryan. People talk about systems in sales, and salespeople will usually push them away because they think, I'm not here to march in lockstep. I'm here to be free. You got to let me fly, right? I'm an individual contributor. But yet, when we use systems, just like the one that it sounds like you've used multiple times to orchestrate the emotional experience, we find that actually allows us to be more present, to be more innovative, to be able to pivot in the middle of a conversation, and of course, to extremely shorten our sales cycle. So I'd like to build a sales system around this with you, because we've never really touched on orchestrating the buyer experience. We could definitely map out a journey because we have data to base that on, but to orchestrate an experience is really looking forward, and it has to be uniquely based on our prospects, which is why I love the idea you mentioned. Hey, this is a transactional deal. You probably don't want to invest the time, but if this is a longer sales cycle deal, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of revenue, it's worth doing this for our decision maker or our decision makers. So when we talk about building sales systems here, we're removing hope with each new sales system, Ryan. So in the military, it's trimming hope away from our mission plan, from our strategy. Same thing in sales. So we use this acronym TRIM because, hey, military is large on acronyms. We love them. So the T in TRIM is the trigger element. I need to know as a salesperson when I would pull this system off the shelf so that I could begin orchestrating the experience of the prospects I'm in touch with. Is this when I get a conversation going with them so I can learn more about them? Is it way before that when I'm developing what my lead list is even going to look like? Where do you recommend I begin with orchestrating the buyer experience?
Okay. So I love this, man. And so the good thing about it is think of it this way, is like, think of every step in the sales process as a checkpoint in which you should be getting deeper and deeper on it, right? So we're not layering on additional processes. We're just integrating this into a process that already exists. However, something beautiful that's happened, and like, have you leveraged ChatGPT a lot at all, or no? Okay. So something that I found out is there's a really cool way, and you're going to want to leverage this. And I've been talking a lot about this because I think like it's exciting, but really scary at the same time, because I could see the bottom portion of the sales world getting axed, right? Just because they're high costing in terms of capital, right? And so there's a lack of the amount of quantity of people needed, right? So I could see people leveling AI to do that. And so one of the really cool things, though, that took me years and years to learn, that I've unlocked a way to do it in like a couple minutes, is by literally, and I even put together a guide on this because I was like, I got to share this with people. Like, this is so cool. So basically all it is like for the KPI piece, to understand how people are evaluated and compensated. Like, you could ask, like, let's say you're selling to a CIO, right? You can ask ChatGPT, is like, okay, act like I'm, you could say like a 20-year CFO or CIO. I'm sorry, we're telling CIO, right? Act like I'm a CIO with 20 years experience that works for this type of company, right? Insert, like, are you publicly traded? Are you private? Are you PE backed, right? What are the top 5 KPIs that I'm evaluated on, right?
Oh, nice. Okay.
It'll tell you, right? The critical thing is you got to have the function. You got to give it a frame of reference in terms of the experience, right? Like 20 years, 30 years, or whatever, because then it makes the model or the AI understand that. And then the ownership structure of the company is really, really important, because I ran side-by-side simulations, and like a CFO of a publicly traded versus a private versus a VC backed, all had different kind of KPIs in there. And so then what that'll do is that'll give you the roadmap of how they're compensated and what they're going to focus on. Right. So that's step one. Step two, to lay the groundwork for this, is ask like, okay, what are their top 5 biggest challenges with hitting those KPIs? How do they emotionally feel? So like, that's like a 3-layer prop stack that you could leverage that will give you years of business acumen in literally minutes. And then what you could do is you could orchestrate your messaging and everything else around that. So that's on the KPI side. The goals and the relationship side of like understanding what's important. There's just different questions that you kind of ask throughout the process, but that'll get you started and that'll get you in the door actually, which is really cool about it. And then the beautiful thing is you can keep chipping away at that and validate like, hey, you know, for example, Mr. CIO, I understand that typically these are the top 5, you know, things that most CIOs that I work with are evaluated on. Are any of these more important to you at the time or not?
Nice.
Right.
Okay.
Like, yeah, these top 2 are the most important for me right now because of the stage we're at as a company. Right. They'll tell you. And the other thing is you're going to separate yourself from 99% of everybody else that walks in there because they're just trying to sell their shit. They're not really trying to understand what's important to them. You know what I mean? So,
I love the trigger of this then. So I've gotten this research done. I've leveraged ChatGPT to get my KPIs. I may be at the stage where I'm now reaching out to this person to begin orchestrating that emotional experience. And like you said, already showing up infinitely more prepared than most salespeople because I know what their likely KPIs are. I know what they're being judged against, what challenges might stand in the way. So now I'm in the R and trim, which is making this process repeatable. Because I need to be able to rubber stamp this across a lot of prospects if I'm trying to scale this great system. So what are the maybe 4 or 5 steps that I want to walk through in a predictable order that may have a lot of sub-steps underneath it? But what are the 4 or 5 big things that I'm going to make sure I do to orchestrate an emotional experience that really lines up with what my buyer cares about?
Yeah, so I think like I just gave an example of what the type of question I'd ask in the first meeting with the KPIs, right? So then it's a real follow. I mean, it's really simple. And then you could build on it every step in the process. So let's say the first one is, okay, you validate what KPIs are most important to them from what you know. And then you're like, okay, well, are there any goals or priorities that you have right now to align with those, right? And then what you do is you tie your solution to what those goals and priorities are. So what that does is that's like the VIP pass. That's like the red rope line that lets you cut in front of other vendors because you're connecting with their top goals and priorities that are relevant now. Okay. And then the third step is really simple. It's just like, hey, you know, and you can do it over Zoom, right? If you have a group of 15 people, it's hard, but there's ways where you could like, if this is what I would say. If you're trying to get with big deals, like you could find ways to get the one-on-one time, or you could find ways to connect with them, right? And so what I would just say is like when you have one of those moments, even if it's like 5 minutes before everybody else jumps on the Zoom call or 5 minutes after, you just be like, hey, what's your, and this has to, you have to come up organic. You can't just blow it out in the middle of the meeting, but like, hey,
tell me about your hobbies. Yeah.
Well, right. It's really asking the question this way. It's hey, like if you have free time out of work, what do you spend your time on? You know, and if they say, I would say probably 7 out of 10 times they'll say family, right? So then you say, okay, well, if it is family, like outside of family, right? Let's say you're not doing something with family, you have time for yourself. What would you spend time on? And that'll tell you what they value the most, what they're passionate about, right? So that's like the foundation if we look at it. And then what you'll do is as you go on through the process, you know, you keep tying your solution back to their KPIs and goals. So that's simple. That's more the logical frame. But then the emotional frame is you keep chipping away and finding other things that they like or focus on. And I'll give you a real world example of this. So understood, and it came up. It was a first opportunity meeting. It was really cool because it was a lunch that we happened to be in town for when we were in New Jersey, but the lunch was in Nashville, right? That's how big the opportunity was. We just happened to be in town or near in the area, I should say, right? Which is nowhere near there, but it was worth it, right? So one of the things he disclosed on the first meeting, like when we had lunch with him, was just like, yeah, one of the things we got coming up is our fantasy football draft, right? We've been doing this for 15 years. I'm the commissioner. It's blah, 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 right? So as we went through the sales process, I would reconnect with that because he's like, this is one of my favorite things in the world to do, right? I was sending him tips. I was doing stuff like that. So just like basically look at this way, just like you would try and convince someone, or not convince, but point out all the benefits of your solution as you go out and go through the sales process. You do the same thing with connecting to them at a human level about things that are important to them, and have those two kind of tracks. And so then you just kind of layer those each step along the way. And then the other thing that I would do is also have an integrity check of like, okay, of these top 3 or 4 most important people in this opportunity, on a scale of 1 to 5, how is my relationship scale? A 5 being they'll invite you to their kid's birthday party, a 1 being they won't talk to you outside the meeting, right? And that's a good integrity check of like where you're tracking in that and where you need to refocus your effort or time. So that's probably a quick
to make sure you're kind of balancing it out, right?
Yeah.
I got that. So that's great, man. This is stuff that anybody can use, by the way, to scale a normal relationship building process. So something that I see in a lot of organizations, and I'm sure you do as well. You get top salespeople, and they have maybe 10 clients that they live off of because they've got 5s, right? They're getting invited to all the weddings, the birthday parties, golf every weekend, all the cool stuff. And their sales managers come to me, as I'm sure they do to you, and they say, we need to get this person to fill the other end of the pipe. Like their market share never grows. It's the same 10 people, and they do well, but it's the same 10 people. Well, this is a way to take that organic relationship building process and scale it out in a very predictable way. So if you do nothing else, for all the listeners out there, except what we've talked about so far, you're going to grow your sales. But now I want to move into the iron trim, which is making this thing improvable. We realized on the battlefield that if we weren't constantly iterating our systems, the folks that we were using those systems on and against, they'd figure it out pretty quick because they were changing as well. 10 years ago, we could not have had the conversation about using artificial intelligence as a prospecting research tool, but we can now. So I'd like to know, if I'm using this platform, this system, for a quarter or a month or even across 10 prospects, what am I going to look at to say, how do I make this thing better? I don't want to move too deep into the measurement because that's the M in trim, but if I'm just looking at making this thing improvable, what are the things I need to begin doing with myself, my team, and my prospects so that I make sure this system is better next month than it is today?
Yeah. So we would do, it's really simple. And this, like I said, this isn't rocket science. It's probably just a different lens of looking through it. But you do a win-loss review of your biggest deals and your biggest losses every quarter, right? And the wins, you identify what parameters you hit and what people did to connect at an emotional level and a relationship level on top of like the business case. And then you do the same thing. And on the loss side, and one of the things that we realized is like after we started going through this on a repeated basis, we saw like a massive pattern of exactly what I'm telling you. They're like, yeah, we didn't have any connection with the decision maker. This person, these 2 people wouldn't meet with us outside of core meetings or respond to us. They're very standoffish, right? And people tell you more about what they're thinking with their actions than versus what they say, because buyers will lie all the time, right? Just because they don't want to let people down, or they don't know how to say no or whatever, but the way they act is a lot more telling. And so I think that's a super simple and easy and actionable way you can measure it and improve upon it on an ongoing basis. And like, here's what I would say in terms of the measurement: just track it and then look at it at the same time. You do it quarterly and then at the end of the year, and then you'll have a batch of, a chunk of wins and a chunk of losses. And then you'll see very, very obvious patterns, especially because you've been refining it of how to do that.
And so I'd say on the measurement piece, then I want to dive just a layer deeper with you on that, because I want to be able to know what I'm supposed to be measuring. So I've got my win-loss, up on the board, whiteboarded, top 5 deals that we won, top 5 deals that we lost that we wish we could have won. Am I looking at whether I fulfilled the criteria of this entire system on each of those deals? What should I be measuring there? And it might not be something that's like, really obvious. It might be the leading indicators of a sale. How engaged were we through the sales process? How willing were they to take my calls? I'm curious, what would you measure on your win-loss deals to make sure that this system was worthwhile to you? Because that's ultimately what we're justifying here, taking the time to do this research so I know, hey, it's worth doing in the future. What am I measuring to make sure this system is worth continuing?
Yeah. So what I would say is like, there's a whole logical component of this, which I'm not going to get in right now. That's the business case logic where you could track that, right? Because it's, but what I would, and that's more often talked about, but there's really obvious ROI indicators on that. On the relationship side, I think it's pretty simple, right? If you look at it, there's usually, for really large deals, there's usually 4 core players, right? There's the signer, the budget holder, the coach, and then I even call it the saboteur, right? Which is the opposite of coach, the coach oppo, if you will, right? Sure. That's the person that'll like backstab you because they made a decision to go with a competitor and they want to protect their decision, right? Because they're at a big company and there's a status increase if it looks like they made the right decision, right? So I think you look through that lens of those four people, and basically, like I said, the signer, the budget holder, the coach, and then the saboteur, and then basically rate on a scale of 1 through 5. Like I said, three means I didn't give you 3. 1 means they won't talk to you outside. It means 3 means they'll talk to you. 5 means like, hey, they'll do stuff with you outside of work, basically. Like super core scale, super simple scale. Leverage that and rate those 4 players for each area. And then you'll see like the results will be so obvious. You'll be like, yeah, we had a 1 here. We had a 2, we had a 3 here. You know, we had 0 5s in this account. The one we won, we had all 5s, right? Like, nice. So it's a really simple measurement because it's hard to measure relationships and emotions. But if you look through that lens, once again, a very simple way to do it and actuate it. And then you'll see trends and patterns. And then what will happen too is you'll see certain people are better at executing this process than others, right? And so those are coaching opportunities. And so you could have the folks that do really well at it give specific tactics on exactly what they did at each step from the wins, and then reverse engineer those and integrate those in your process as well.
No, that's amazing, Ryan. So we've got this complete sales system beginning to end for how we can identify what the KPIs are of people that we've never talked to before, get what their likely challenges are against those KPIs, which gives us plenty of information to show up to our first meeting with to sound like we know a little bit about what we're talking about, and then to begin to develop those relationships in a systemized, scalable way that's not inauthentic, because you still got to do the work of finding ways to connect with these people. But if we don't take the time to find out what these folks are interested in, both at work and out of work, we'll never have the opportunity to build these trusting relationships that ultimately help us shorten sales cycles and close more deals. So great end-to-end sales system. Ryan, how do people get in touch with you? Because I know you've got some stuff out there. You mentioned a guide that you had built. Love a way to get in touch with that guide to make sure we're using this system. How do we get deeper into your world?
Yeah. So, I think I have a website, but I think if you really want to connect with me, there's really good content that I'm posting daily on LinkedIn under Ryan Staley, and the guide is in there. Just click the link in my profile. It's a free guide. It's got all those KPI triggers within there. So that's super simple. And then the other thing is, if you want to listen to audio, I have a podcast called The Scale Up Show, where I've been interviewing tech CEOs for years. And the insights I get in terms of go-to-market challenges, everything like that, are absolutely amazing. So I would say those are the 2 best ways to connect with me.
That's amazing, sir. So definitely take advantage of that, folks. We're going to make sure we link Ryan's LinkedIn profile in all of our posts. So definitely use those. Get there, get the guide. Make sure you're following Ryan. For us here at Bulletproof Selling, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button if you're catching this on our YouTube channel. If you're listening to it on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, anywhere the podcast can be found, best thing you can do for us, leave a review. Let other salespeople know that hope does not have to be part of their sales strategy anymore. Why? Because now you can be bulletproof in it. Ryan, thank you so much for serving the sales community, sir. It was a pleasure having you. Let's get out there ourselves and make selling bulletproof.
Thanks, Sean.